Welcome to the InfoWars Nightly News. I'm David Knight. It's August 29th, 2013, and here are our top stories.
Tonight, the Syrian war heats up. Are you paying attention? And the bankster cartel are engineering our economic destruction. Then, David Knight sits down with two former cops who explain what to do when you get pulled over. All this and more on the InfoWars Nightly News.
Well, what is the definition of a warmonger? Is it somebody that just pushes for war? You know, a fishmonger was somebody who sold fish. A fleshmonger was somebody who sold flesh, a pimp. Well, a warmonger is somebody who is selling war. They're selling war and nobody is buying it. And there's a good reason for the fact that they've only got a 9% approval rate. In an article from InfoWars called Alternative Media Blocks Globalist Attempt to Launch World War III, we point out that it was just a month ago that you had the public affairs of Department of Defense talking about how they were having difficulty, talking about how they didn't have any credibility. They couldn't sell their narrative. You even had lower-level staffers saying, what we're putting out is mindless propaganda and the public isn't buying it. And then, of course, the alternative media has covered in great detail the fact that James Clapper, the NSA, said that he had least untruthful manner that he had told about what had happened. And basically, he had lied. And so what we're showing is that it's not just being least untruthful, it's actually lies. They've lied to us about the causes of war, they've lied to us about how they conducted war, and they have lied to us about the price of war, the casualties of war. And the public just isn't buying it. This is a war that the 1% of the 1% wants. And this is something that is being pushed back by the alternative media. The alternative media is standing between us and World War III. In an article from StoryLeak.com, they point out that Brzezinski is saying that the global political awakening is making the Syrian war difficult. Yes, difficult for them to sell. Now remember who Brzezinski is. He was the National Security Advisor for Jimmy Carter. And he was also a founder of the Trilateral Commission, and as a national security advisor for Jimmy Carter, he created al-Qaeda. He created the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, which became al-Qaeda. And 35 years ago, he was able to do whatever he wanted to. And he was basically able to sell that to the American public, to the world public, because he had the media following lockstep behind him, like Operation Mockingbird. But today, there is what he calls a global political awakening. He says a policy of force that is based on Western and, in some cases, former colonial powers does not seem to me to be a very promising avenue to an eventual solution to the regional problem. In other words, they just are having a hard time selling war and neo-colonialism. Now, one of the reasons that's working is because of alternative media and because of your support for Prison Planet TV and InfoWars. So don't forget to get a subscription and support this operation, and you can also pass that along to your friends and family. Up to 10 people can watch that simultaneously along with you. Now, in the UK, there's actually a debate that's going on, of sorts, although David Cameron, the Prime Minister, says that the British military attack will be a judgment call. And guess who gets to make that judgment? It'll probably be just him. But the UK Prime Minister said that he had no smoking piece of intelligence linking chemical weapon attacks to the Syrian regime. That's right. That's what we've been pointing out. But he argued in favor of military intervention anyway, and said that he believed that forces loyal to Bashar Assad did use poisonous gas against the Syrian people, quote, right in front of our eyes. Well, the problem is that it wasn't right in front of our eyes. And what we're seeing is a narrative that is changing, a narrative that is falling apart before our eyes. Doctors Without Borders was a source of information that they kept going back to and referring, and yet Doctors Without Borders is now saying that the real death toll is 355, not the 1,300 to 1,600 that was originally claimed by rebel factions. So even Doctors Without Borders is pushing back against that. And if you remember, back in May, we had the UN went into Syria and looked at a previous chemical attack, and they identified it as being sarin gas. In an article from the Huffington Post, we had a investigator, Del Ponte, who was a UN investigator for the Swiss-Italian television, gave an interview to them and said, our investigators have been in neighboring countries interviewing victims, doctors, field hospitals. According to the report last week, which I've seen, there's strong, concrete suspicion, yet not incontrovertible proof that the use of sarin gas was used from the way the victims were treated. Now, this is the important point, she says. This was used on the part of the opposition, the rebels, not by the government authorities. So we have an incident just 3 months ago where UN investigators said that they believed that the rebels had used sarin gas. However, we're supposed to not care about who used it, where it came from, not even whether or not it was sarin gas. If it was just a chemical attack, we should go in and do something about it, because now, and the death toll is 355, not to say that it wasn't a horrible incident, not to say that 355 people killed isn't a tragedy, especially the way they died. But think about how many hundreds of thousands of people are going to die. Think about the fact that the Syrian war has already been going on for 2 years, and already we've had over 100,000 casualties. Think about the fact that the antagonist in this war is al-Qaeda, going back to what Zbigniew Brzezinski and the American government created back in the late 1970s. They're our ally there, although they're the reason for all the oppression that we have against the Bill of Rights and against us as citizens here at home. And as Kucinich pointed out, we are going to now act as their air force in Syria. Now, is Obama making the case to Congress for war? No, he's not going to bother with that. Here's what a candidate Obama said. This is an article from InfoWars.com. And this is based on an interview with Charlie Savage in December 20th of 2007. Remember, this was just before the primaries are going to begin in Iowa and New Hampshire. And he was asked by Charlie Savage, under what circumstances would the president have constitutional authority to bomb Iran at that time without seeking use of force authorization from Congress in a situation that does not involve stopping an imminent threat? That's the key. And Obama said the president does not have power under the Constitution to unilaterally authorize a military attack in a situation that does not involve stopping an actual or an imminent threat to the nation. Now, that's what Obama said as a candidate, just as the primaries were beginning to start, because he knew that the American people don't want endless wars. We've seen this happening now since the end of World War II, and we're sick and tired of being lied to. We're sick and tired of paying for it in our lives and in our money. So he was telling people what was in the Constitution, but now President Obama is doing exactly the opposite. He is ignoring Congress, and this was pointed out yesterday in a story by about Scott Rigel, who is a Virginia representative, a Republican, and he was asking for John Boehner to call back Congress because Congress is not in session. This is all happening without Congress even being in session, let alone voting on this. Now today, we have a Democrat taking on Democrat leadership on this, and this is New York Representative Gerald Nadler, ranking Democrat on the House Judiciary Subcommittee on the Constitution and Civil Justice, stated the obvious on Wednesday. He said the Constitution requires that barring an attack on the United States or an imminent threat to the U.S., same wording as the president. They know what the Constitution says. They just won't follow it. Any decision to use military force can only be made by Congress, not by the president. The decision to go to war, and we should be clear, launching a military strike on another country, justified or not, is an act of war. That is reserved by the Constitution to the American people, acting through their elected representatives in Congress. And since there is no imminent threat to the United States, there is no legal justification for bypassing the constitutionally required congressional authorization. Consultation, as Obama has put it, with Congress is not sufficient. The Constitution requires congressional authorization. Now, we had this discussion just a couple of months ago when John Kerry was confirmed as Secretary of State. You remember Rand Paul questioned him on this very thing, and he dodged it. But Leon Panetta did not dodge the question when he was asked this by Jeff Sessions when he was being confirmed for Secretary of Defense. He plainly stated that, in his opinion, he didn't believe that he needed to go to Congress. He said he was going to get his authorization from NATO or the UN if he was going to get it from anybody else, and indicated that he just might act unilaterally without anybody agreeing to it. And that's what we're seeing going on now. And of course, Jeff Sessions was taken back by that, but he didn't do what he should have done. And that is say, you're not qualified for the office then, and you need to be impeached. Now, Cruz has pointed out, this is a great little graphic that he tweeted out today, Senator Cruz has also taken this on. And he's asking the same question that Representative Scott Rigel of Virginia said yesterday, and that is, why aren't we having a discussion? They're having this discussion in England, but look at the empty chairs there in the U.S. Congress, in the U.S. Senate, and the U.S. House. Nothing is being talked about. we're just waiting around to see whether or not it suits Obama to start a war without anybody's approval, with only a 9% approval rate, according to major scientific polls, without the approval as required in the Constitution by the Congress. So what is he waiting for? Well, there's speculation. We have an article from Paul Joseph Watson, and it's a tweet that says that they believe that they're waiting for the UN inspectors to leave on Saturday before they start the attack. And then an article also on InfoWars from Steve Watson says that intelligence sources say that Obama is stalling on Syria in order to make a deal with Putin. What he's saying is here that they're speculating that the U.S. would soften its military action against the Assad regime and his army and reduce it to a token blow. Of course, people will die with that token blow, after which the American and Russian presidents would announce the convening of Geneva II to hammer out a solution of the Syrian crisis and end the civil war. There you go. Obama's got his distraction for domestic purposes, and he might even get a peace prize if he can work out something with Obama, with Putin and a Geneva II conference. That brings us to our quote of the day from Bill Clinton, and he said, "We can't be so fixated on our desire to preserve the rights of ordinary Americans." Isn't that sad? Well, you know, Bill Clinton doesn't have a desire to preserve the rights of ordinary Americans. He took an oath, actually. All these people took oaths. And so whether they have a desire or not, they took an oath, and they're violating that oath on a regular basis. Now, of course, it's to the benefit of our rulers to cover up what's going on here at home. We have endless scandals because of criminal, illegal activity being conducted by the administration. And it's not just the Obama administration, although it's gotten to new heights and new extents with the Obama administration. Well, as we said at the beginning of the program, the obvious beneficiaries of war are the people who sell the weapons. But of course, there are bankers who also make a lot of money in the uncertain economic times. The Rockefeller family, as well as the Rothschild family, both made their initial fortunes profiteering off of war. And this last week, we just saw a big confab of bankers taking place in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And of course, the mainstream media has pretty much ignored this or speculated as to who the next Fed chairman is going to be. But somebody who really knows these guys, Jim Rogers, former investor and commodities tycoon, had a lot to say about this. And here's what he said: whether they keep printing or stop printing money globally, it's going to end badly. Banks are not going to be lending. Financial markets are going to go down. Currency markets are going to go in great turmoil. You've got a bubble in some sectors. You have inflation, and then you have interest rates going up. It's a mess because printing money is artificial. It's never worked. And as the economy slows down, Rogers predicts they're going to take money wherever they can. They're going to take our bank accounts and our retirement accounts. We've had perilous times, and it's going to get worse. It's coming. Be worried. Be very careful. Well, they may be coming after your bank accounts. They may be sending the country to war, but there's a little bit of a silver lining. It turns out that Naked Juice has a class action law settlement that has just been announced, and you may be able to get $45 back from Pepsi. In a story from Natural News, they report that Naked Juice intentionally used misleading language to give consumers the false impression that the beverage's vitamin content is due to nutritious fruits and juices rather than added synthetic compounds. And Pepsi contained a laundry list of synthetic chemicals, including calcium pantothenate, synthetically produced from formaldehyde. And starting today, you can now be eligible to receive up to $45 from Pepsi. Any person who claims to have purchased Naked Juice, even if they have no proof of such a purchase, can now participate in a class action claim and receive up to a $45 check as part of the settlement. And of course, that would just about pay for a Prison Planet TV subscription, and it would help to support our operation. So please consider that. Now you can watch the InfoWars Nightly News streaming live as it happens for free.
Check it out at infowars.com/show.
Narrative. You even had lower level staffers saying, what we're putting out is mindless propaganda and the public isn't buying it. And then, of course, the alternative media has covered in great detail the fact that James Clapper, the NSA, said that he had least untruthful manner that he had told about what had happened. And basically, he had lied. And so what we're showing is that it's not just being least untruthful, it's actually lies. They've lied to us about the causes of war, they've lied to us about how they conducted war, and they have lied to us about the price of war, the casualties of war. And the public just isn't buying it. This is a war. Welcome to the InfoWars Nightly News. I'm David Knight. It's August 29th, 2013, and here are our top stories.
Tonight, the Syrian war heats up. Are you paying attention? And the bankster cartel are engineering our economic destruction. Then, David Knight sits down with two former cops who explain what to do when you get pulled over. All this and more on the InfoWars Nightly News.
Well, what is the definition of a
It's time for humanity to stand up in the InfoWar. You want to fight? You better believe you've got one!
warmonger? Is it somebody that just pushes for war? You know, a fishmonger was somebody who sold fish. A fleshmonger was somebody who sold flesh, a pimp. Well, a warmonger is somebody who is selling war. They're selling war and nobody is buying it. And there's a good reason for the fact that they've only got a 9% approval rate. In an article from InfoWars called Alternative Media Blocks Globalist Attempt to Launch World War III, we point out that it was just a month ago that you had the public affairs of Department of Defense talking about how they were having difficulty, talking about how they didn't have any credibility. They couldn't sell their that the 1% of the 1% wants. And this is something that is being pushed back by the alternative media. The alternative media is standing between us and World War III. In an article from StoryLeak.com, they point out that Brzezinski is saying that the global political awakening is making the Syrian war difficult. Yes, difficult for them to sell. Now remember who Brzezinski is. He was the National Security Advisor for Jimmy Carter, and he was also a founder of the Trilateral Commission, and as a National Security Advisor for Jimmy Carter, he created Al-Qaeda.